The chaplain had buried a lot of young men in a very short time, and it had put a question in him that he could not get rid of, and one night in the cold he brought it to the one man he thought might have an answer. He found the colonel awake, which did not surprise him, because the colonel was almost always awake, and he sat down near him, and for a while he did not say anything, and then he asked the thing he had come to ask. He asked him how he slept. He did not mean it as small talk. A chaplain does not cross a freezing perimeter at night to make small talk. He meant it exactly, and the colonel understood exactly what he meant, because the question underneath the question was the one the chaplain had been carrying from grave to frozen grave for days. How do you give the orders that send these boys to the places they die, and then close your eyes at night? How do you carry that and still function? How does a man who is responsible for this much death sleep at all? That was what the chaplain was really asking. And Colonel Lewis Puller looked at him in the dark and thought about it, and gave him an answer that was 4 words long. And the answer was not comforting, and it was not what the chaplain expected, and it was the truest thing anyone said to him in that entire war. If you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Let me back up, because to understand the question, you have to understand the man who was asking it, and what his particular job was in a place like that. In late November and early December of 1950, the 1st Marine Division was fighting its way out of the Chosin Reservoir in the mountains of northern Korea, surrounded in cold that fell to 35 degrees below zero. And in any division, there is a category of men whose war is different from everyone else's, and the chaplains are in it. A chaplain does not carry a rifle. He carries something heavier, in a way, because his job is to be present at the exact moments other men look away from. He is there when the wounded come in. He is there when they do not make it. He is the one who kneels by the dying and says the words, and he is the one who, afterward, has to write the letter home, or help the graves registration people, or simply be the man who was there when a 19-year-old from some town in Ohio stopped being alive. And at Chosin he was doing this in numbers, in cold, in a fighting withdrawal, with the ground frozen too hard to dig proper graves, and the dead having to be carried out instead, wrapped and stacked and brought down the road. That was the chaplain's war, not the firing. The aftermath of the firing, over and over, more times in those weeks than a man is built to absorb. And there was a particular cruelty to it at Chosin that made it worse than it would have been almost anywhere else. The ground was frozen to the hardness of stone. You could not dig a grave in it. Men tried, with entrenching tools and with fires lit to thaw the earth, and mostly failed. And the dead who could not be carried out had to be laid in whatever the ground would give, which was not much, and marked as best they could, with the promise that someone would come back for them. The chaplain was the man who made that promise, over and over, kneeling on frozen ground beside a boy he could not properly bury, telling him and telling the men watching that he would not be left, that they would come back. And he did not entirely know if it was true. He was carrying not just the deaths but the incompleteness of them, the graves that were not graves, the promise he could not personally guarantee, and on top of that, he had a second job that nobody talked about, which was to be the man who did not crack. The men watched the chaplain the way they watched the officers. If the chaplain came apart, something came apart in all of them, because the chaplain was supposed to be the one who had a framework big enough to hold this, and if his framework broke, then there was no framework, and the men could feel that. So he had to carry all of it, and also carry it visibly well, which meant he had nowhere to put it down, ever, in front of anyone, which is why he came to the colonel alone, in the dark, when no one could see. And it had put a specific weight on him, and the weight had a specific shape, and the shape was a question about how anyone carries this. Now, here's the thing. The chaplain had noticed something about the colonel, and it was the reason he brought the question to him and not to someone else. He had noticed that Puller was not cold, not physically. Everyone was physically cold. He meant something else. He had watched a lot of officers deal with the death around them at Chosin, and he had seen the 2 usual ways men handle it, and Puller did neither. The first way is to break under it, to let the weight of the dead get in and start to crack the man carrying it, which is human and understandable, and also, in a commander, catastrophic, because a commander who has cracked cannot make the hard, clean decisions that get the living out. The chaplain had seen good men start to go that way. And the second way is worse, and more common in men who have to keep functioning. To go numb, to build a wall, to stop letting the death mean anything, because if it means something it will break you, so you make it mean nothing, and you keep giving the orders, with a kind of deadness behind the eyes. The chaplain had seen that too, and it frightened him more than the breaking did, because the numb men still worked, they just were not quite people anymore. Puller was neither. He gave the hard orders. Nobody gave them harder or cleaner, and the death clearly reached him. You could see that it reached him, and yet it did not break him, and it had not turned him to stone. He was carrying it, and he was still a man, and he was still functioning, all three at once, which the chaplain had come to believe was nearly impossible, and he wanted to know how it was done, because he himself was not sure he could keep doing it much longer. That is who was asking. A man whose whole job was death, who was reaching the end of what he could carry, coming to the one man he had seen carry it without breaking and without going numb, to ask the only question that mattered. How do you sleep? Here's what doesn't make it into the accounts. The chaplain said later that he had half expected one of two answers, and had dreaded both. He thought Puller might give him the tough answer, the hard-bitten thing, some version of, "You don't think about it, you do your job," which would have been the numb man's answer, the wall, and it would have told the chaplain that even this man had gone to stone, and there was no third way. Or he thought Puller might give him the chaplain's own kind of answer back, some words about God or duty or the cause, the comfort that the chaplain spent his own days handing to other men, and that had stopped, if he was honest, doing very much for him. He got neither. He got 4 words, and they were not comfort, and they were not the wall, and that was exactly why they worked. Stay with me, because the 4 words are the whole thing, and they are not what you are expecting either. Puller was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I don't. Not well." 4 words. I don't. Not well. And then, because that was true but it was not the whole of what he meant, he said a little more. The accounts vary on the exact wording, but the sense of it was this. He did not sleep well. He did not expect to sleep well. A man who could sleep well after sending those boys where he had sent them would be a man he would not trust to command, because that man would either be lying or would be the numb thing, the one who had stopped letting it matter. The not sleeping was not a wound to be healed. It was the price. It was the cost of caring about the men and being responsible for them at the same time, and he had decided a long time ago that he was going to pay it, in full, every night, rather than stop paying it, because the day he stopped paying it was the day he would have become the kind of commander who gets men killed for nothing. And this is where it gets complicated, because what Puller had just told the chaplain was, on the face of it, terrible news. The chaplain had come looking for relief, for the secret, for the technique that let this remarkable man carry the death without suffering. And Puller had told him there was no technique, that he suffered, that he did not sleep, that the weight the chaplain was buckling under was real, and was not a sign that the chaplain was failing, and was not going to go away. But the chaplain said it was the most comforting thing anyone told him in the war, and it took him years to fully understand why. See, what most people miss about this story is that they think the chaplain wanted to be told the pain would stop. He did not, in the end, want that. What he wanted, without quite knowing it, was to be told that the pain was not a malfunction. He had been walking around Chosin believing that the fact that he could not sleep, the fact that the deaths were getting to him, the fact that the weight was nearly crushing him, meant that he was weak, that he was not built for this, that better men carried it more easily. And Puller, in 4 words, had told him the opposite, that the strongest man he knew did not carry it easily either, that the not sleeping was not weakness. It was the tax that decent men pay for staying decent in a place designed to make them monsters, and that paying it, night after night, was not the thing to be ashamed of. It was the thing to hold on to. The men who go numb sleep fine. The men who break stop functioning. And in between, doing the hardest thing of all, are the men who keep carrying it, and keep working, and keep hurting, and keep going, who pay the tax every single night, and get up every single morning, and do the job again. Puller was one of those men, and he had just told the chaplain without a word of comfort, that the chaplain was one of them too, and that the sleeplessness he had taken for failure was in fact the proof of it. And there is a reason this matters, far beyond that cold tent, far beyond the war, in lives that will never go anywhere near a battlefield. Because everyone who does hard work that touches other people eventually meets a version of this question. The doctor who loses patience. The nurse who works the ward where people do not get better. The parent carrying a family through a bad year. The person caring for someone who is dying slowly at home. All of them, sooner or later, hit the night where the weight seems like too much, and they wonder what is wrong with them, that they cannot carry it more easily. And all of them are asking, in their own dark, the chaplain's question, how do you sleep? And most of them have been told, or have told themselves, that the fact that they cannot is a sign of weakness. Puller's 4 words are the answer for all of them. The ache is not the malfunction. The ache is what it costs to still be a person while doing something that would be easier to do if you stopped being one. The people who feel nothing have not solved the problem. They have paid a different and higher price and called it strength. That is not comfort. Comfort would have been a lie. What Puller gave him was something better and harder. The truth that the suffering was not a sign he was doing it wrong, but a sign he was doing it right, and that the only people at Chosin who slept well were the ones who had stopped being able to feel it. The chaplain went back across the perimeter that night, and he did not sleep, and for the first time in weeks, the not sleeping did not frighten him. He understood now what it was. It was the cost. He had been paying it all along and calling it failure, and a barrel-chested colonel in the dark had told him, in 4 words, that it was not failure. It was the receipt. He kept doing the job. He buried more boys before Chosin was over, and he wrote more letters, and he did not sleep well for the rest of the war, and possibly, in some measure, for the rest of his life. But he carried it differently after that night, because he was no longer carrying it plus the shame of not being able to carry it easily. He was just carrying it, which was still almost too much, but was, it turned out, exactly enough. He told the story for the rest of his life, not as a story about a great warrior, though Puller was one. As a story about the night he asked the hardest man he knew how he slept, and the hardest man he knew told him the truth. I don't, not well, and set him free. So, was that the right thing for Puller to say? To tell a suffering man there was no relief coming, that the pain was the price, and it was not going to stop? Some would say no, that the chaplain came to him hurting and reaching out, and that the kind thing, the merciful thing, would have been to offer some comfort, some hope that it eases, rather than to tell an already breaking man that the weight was permanent. Others would say that comfort would have been a lie, and that the chaplain did not need a lie, he needed the truth, that his suffering was not weakness but the tax of a decent man, and that telling him so was the most useful and most respectful thing anyone could have done, that Puller did not add to his burden. He took away the second burden, the shame, and left him carrying only the first, which was the one he could actually bear. Let us know where you land in the comments below, and if you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, make sure you subscribe.